We are here with a great friend, House Majority Leader Steve Scalise, and we are talking about the aforementioned H.R. 1. Mr. Scalise was quarterback of this bill. So Kevin McCarthy went through a bunch of it, but I had some questions too. I mean, in some sense, this is the kind of uniform permitting across the board that everybody's talked about, but the Biden simply won't deliver. And I wanted to ask you, Steve, this idea of one federal decision, which we had put together in the Trump years. Biden overturned that. It cut the red tape. You know, a lot of these projects you could get a sign-off in 2 years. Is that going to be part of this?
Absolutely, Larry. It's good to see you here in the Capitol, by the way.
Thank you, sir.
But I think the more Americans find out about the Lower Energy Costs Act, they're going to want this not only to be passed through the House, but they are going to want President Biden to sign it because it's going to lower energy costs for families who are paying too much because of President Biden's attack on American energy. And so as you were talking about, I call it a one-stop shop. Right now, if you're trying to get permitting for pipelines, for example, it's almost impossible to do. They don't want, the Biden administration doesn't want pipelines to move energy. They want to make it harder to produce American energy. So right now you might have to go through 5 different agencies, and each one of them is going to drag their feet. It might be over a year, 2 years before you get an answer. So they just kill these projects. If you just went to one agency and take FERC, for example, where all of the regulations are rolled into one place, we streamline the regulations, and that really, by the way, that lowers costs for families. People know when they're paying 20, 30% more for energy. If it's a cold winter, as it's been, you're trying to heat your home, you're paying a lot more than you were a year ago because of President Biden's policies. So let's streamline it. And then, of course, we go into opening up more leasing. We deal with streamlining of permitting in a lot of other places, too. Moving energy to places, the Northeast right now, because New York's blocked pipelines, so you can't get Pennsylvania shale to other parts of the New England states. And they're paying a lot more because they have to ship it in from foreign countries. Why should you have to ship your energy in from foreign countries, paying a lot more, higher environmental costs, by the way, if you can get it from your neighbor in Pennsylvania? We streamline that process as well. So it's going to be great for American energy. It brings in more federal revenues, but it also lowers costs for family. That's why we're bringing forward the Lower Energy Costs Act, H.R. 1.
That's a much better way. I'm going to discard H.R. 1. I like the Lower Energy Costs Act because I think that's true.
That's what it'll do.
I mean, back of the envelope, we've done some stuff on this. If you could get back just on the oil front, we were over 13 million barrels a day pre-pandemic. That's slumped, obviously. Now it's only come back to 12 million barrels a day. The Energy Department several years ago said at this point we could be producing 14 or 15 million barrels a day. That's $40 a barrel. Maybe high of 50, maybe low of 30. That's affordability for average working typical families. That's a huge thing. And by the way, it's fertilizers come down, all this stuff that I read off before. Energy permeates every part, petroleum type products, every part of the economy. Bidens don't get that. You will make it cheaper.
Yeah, it lowers costs for families. But look, I was meeting with some Farm Bureau folks from different parts of the country earlier this week, and the two things they tell you, number one, their diesel costs are dramatically higher, and their fertilizer costs are higher, and a lot of that is because of Biden's anti-American energy policies. And so by getting these policies right, just going back to allowing Americans to produce, we do it cleaner than anybody else in the world. Look, these far-left socialists, these big government socialists, they wake up every day trying to beat up on America. They trash America, and they act like we're destroying the planet. Nobody is more environmentally friendly than the United States of America. Things are going to get produced in the world. China's building a new coal plant every week. And China's, by the way, getting a lot of the jobs that Biden's running away from America. It emits 4 or 5 times more carbon to make some of the same products in China than America. And by the way, in case you didn't see the spy balloon, they're not an ally of ours. So why don't we make more things here? Rare earth minerals, and Speaker McCarthy touched on this. Pete Stauber's bill, he's from Minnesota. He knows a thing or two about rare earth minerals. They've made it almost impossible to mine in America. So what does that mean? China mines most of those rare earth minerals. You want to make electric vehicles? Most of those supplies are coming from China. Why would we want to be more reliant on China?
China gives them a dagger at our neck.
Let's make it here.
We don't have any
power. And we do it better than anybody else in the world.
Is it possible, I mean, if you could take the State Department out of this regulatory maze, you might be able to get the XL pipeline through.
Yeah, and in fact, that's in our bill, too. You'll love that component as well. And, whether it's Keystone XL, which Biden said no to, and remember, Biden's not against all pipelines. He was just against American pipelines. He said yes to Russia getting a pipeline while he was begging Putin to produce more oil. This is lunacy. And people get this. People, when they're paying $4 or $5 a gallon at the pump, they get it. When they're paying 30% more for their household electricity costs, they get it. That's why they're going to love the Lower Energy Costs Act.
Can we get some closure and some specificity on offshore leasing, on onshore federal leasing, everything they've stalled, on the Willow Reservoir up in Alaska, which Ms. Howland in the Interior Department continues to try to stop? I mean, can that stuff get closure?
Yeah, and in fact, we do real permitting and leasing. Biden's canceled so many lease sales over and over again. There's mandated lease sales in law, and he's ignored it. The courts have told him to do it, and they drag their feet. So we put some strong language there so that we can have more leasing. Look at a State of the Union the other night. On one hand, he derided oil companies, saying they're not drilling enough. And then he said, oh, and by the way, in 10 years, we won't need oil in America. I mean, nobody believes that. It's not like transitioning away from something. We're a country that, like everywhere in the world that's industrialized, we're all going to use more energy. We need all of the above. We need more oil, natural gas. We need nuclear power. Wind and solar are part of that too, but they're not going to replace what we have.
This bill, tell me if I'm wrong, but this bill basically will advance all the above.
Absolutely.
They've been stopping all the above.
Yeah, there's language that even promotes the windmill development in places like the Gulf of Mexico, where there's interest in private investment, not federal money. Biden loves it when taxpayer money is subsidizing things that fail. How about we get the private sector to put their money into making things work? And so every form of energy is going to compete against itself. But the bottom line is we need more of all of it. We don't need less of one and more of the other. That's more costly. People are paying too much already. We don't need to close down the things that work.
But Steve, $5 trillion of higher taxes later, are we going to have a private sector? I mean, nobody's had time to read this budget, but you've seen the headlines. This is the darndest thing I've ever seen.
Oh my gosh, from the things we've already seen. And look, I'll quote our budget chairman, the new Republican House budget chairman, Jody Arrington, said this bill's dead on arrival. Trillions in new taxes, raising costs for families. Biden talked about raising the corporate rate. All that means is when you go to the grocery store, you're going to pay more. If you go to a department store to buy clothes for your kids for school, it's going to cost you more. Who wants to pay more? Biden wants you to pay more.
Wages will fall.
Wages will fall.
This was Kevin Hass's work years ago.
Big government socialism has failed every time it's been tried. We don't need more of it.
You jack up the corporate tax rate, the biggest loser is the blue-collar, typical, average working folks. They're the biggest
And there's been
losers.
an assault on blue-collar workers. You've seen it just with this ESG legislation that we're sending over to President Biden right now. President Biden put policies in place that lower the returns on 401ks for working families at the same time that he's helping these billionaire elitists who want all these woke policies at the cost of lower returns for lower income families. Stop siding with billionaires over hard-working taxpayers. We're going to stand up for those hard workers.
I always have fun talking to you. They're all yelling at me. I got to get out.
Well, look, we'll do this more. Come back and visit us anytime.
Really? Am I welcome here?
When we pass the lower energy costs through the House in just 3 weeks, Larry, I want you to come back.
I will come down for that.
And we'll give you a pen that we sign the bill with. Speaker McCarthy is going to have that for you.
Fabulous stuff. Really, it's just wonderful.
It's a new day.
Good news and optimism is always better than bad news and socialism anyway. Thank you, Congressman Steve Scalise.